Welcome to another episode of We Don't Die. I'm your host, Sandra Champlain, author of the international best-selling book called We Don't Die: A Skeptic's Discovery of Life After Death. And just a reminder, my home base is wedon'tdie.com, where you can always find great things. We offer medium classes, demonstrations. You can listen to all episodes of this show and also my show on iHeartRadio there, now over 750 episodes. And at the bottom of the page at wedon'tdie.com, if you don't have a copy of my book and you'd like a free PDF copy, you can have one. Just type in your name and your email address. There's a bunch of other goodies you get there as well. Okay, let's move on to our fabulous, beautiful guest. Her name is Athena Monet. She's a spiritual teacher, intuitive guide, and the founder of the Seaside Shaman. After the sudden loss of her mother on Christmas Day, Athena was plunged into a period of deep grief and a mysterious chronic illness that doctors couldn't explain. At a breaking point, she was led to a local medicine woman where a profound and miraculous healing experience reawakened her dormant ancestral gifts of clairvoyance and clairsentience. This journey guided her from the corporate world of architecture to her true soul-led path. Athena helps people navigate their own transitions and grief by teaching them how to connect with their spiritual team of angels, spirit guides, helpers, and loved ones on the other side. You can find out more about this wonderful, beautiful woman at seasideshaman.com. Athena, welcome to We Don't Die.
Thank you for having me.
You are most welcome. You are just a bright, vibrant soul. We got to talk just for a few minutes before we press the record button. I'm so grateful to meet you. Why don't you tell everybody where you are in the world right now, maybe a little bit about your history so we can get to know you.
Yeah, so I'm in Delaware. So people often joke we have shirts here that say Delaware, WHERE, because people are like, where in the world is Delaware? So it's a tiny little state. And I live in Lewis, which is a super cute little historic town on the coast in Delaware. So it's a little best kept secret. I've been here for a decade now. I left DC, Washington, DC, where I was working in architecture and then was just looking for solace and quiet and a slower pace of living and found my way here with my husband and children. So yeah, I love it here at the beach. And as you shared in the introduction, I now work as a shaman. So I'm doing this work full time. And I do combine gifts of, as you said, clairsentience, clairvoyance to assist me with channeling to my clients. I do a lot of grief work. And I also support women through what I call breakthroughs, where we find ourselves stuck, usually by old programming, old beliefs, limitations, things we perceive that aren't even true. And then we break through those illusions and get to the other side and find a much more joyful, free, vibrant life. So that's a lot of what I do here.
Well, you fit the description of somebody making a difference. That is for sure. Were you always someone who believed in the other side and these things or not? And can you tell us what happened? Tell us about your mom and your
Yeah,
journey,
yeah.
illness, and all that.
Yeah, I did. I believed as a child, I would see things, I'd see figures and people. And, I share with people sometimes that I remember like running to my mom's room and being like, Mommy, there's a man in my room. And like, I remember vividly seeing a Native American man at the foot of the bed and just like very stern looking, but kind of protective. I was a very common sleepwalker. So I was constantly leaving the house and going outside. I was in Louisiana growing up. So we had a door to the outside, like right out of our bedroom. And I would just get up and sleepwalk. So I felt like he was a protector. But, I'd say like, oh, there's me. And she'd be like, there's nobody in your room. Go back to sleep, And I'm like, I swear there is. And then I had a pretty tumultuous childhood. So I was adopted by my maternal grandmother. My birth mother was very young when she had me. And so they sent her away, as they did in the 70s and 80s, even before that. And so they sent her away and they just, I never knew. I thought she was my sister that was on the other side of the country. But as I came into elementary school, she, got a little bit older and decided she wanted to try to be a mother. And so they shipped me from Louisiana to Ohio to be with her and her new husband. And long story short, a lot of trauma in this time with this woman. And I would see things. And she would say, "Oh, that's your imaginary friend." But during some of the trauma, she would also tell me, "Well, that didn't happen," about things that I was experiencing. So the line between reality and the questioning of what's real, what's not, based on my personal experience, was really put to the test in my childhood. So I just allowed myself to kind of exit reality and live kind of in a world inside my own head, and really took the route of art. So art was kind of my safe space, my outlet. That's what I initially went to college for. But during that time, I was very fascinated by the esoteric, by yoga tradition, anything I could read about Hinduism. I was also really fascinated by the Kabbalah, just religion in whole, and philosophy. So I was constantly going to the bookstore with my sister at the time and reading these books and gobbling it up. In high school, I took philosophy in college. I also was a credit away from a minor in anthropology in college, which is a completely random when you're studying architecture. But I was just so fascinated by it that I kept taking these classes and I didn't know why. And what's really fun now is a lot of traditional shamans, their degrees are actually in anthropology. So that's kind of a fun bridge that I've learned since. But yeah, so I'd say, you know, I I came to gradually explore and understand how the different spirit worlds were working just through my yoga practice initially and my intuition. But I was always questioning because as a child, I had been told that these things weren't real or things that I believed. I was always fascinated by psychic phenomena. That's another one. So Sylvia Browne was around when I was a kid. So I'd watch her on Oprah and just be fascinated and try to understand it. And I would have, I didn't understand it at the time, but I would have flashes of like a movie when I would be with someone and I'd be overcome with emotion. Sometimes I would cry or feel very sad, and I didn't understand what was going on. And in my brain, I was like, "You've seen too many movies, Athena," because I kept thinking I was associating movies with different people that I would meet. And later, my shaman teacher explained to me that those were not movies, those were the people's stories that I was seeing. And so I started to understand kind of, you know, empathy that was coming up for me, storylines, how I see them. I see them as just like a projection in the air, kind of in front of someone. I was able to learn to turn it off and turn it on, kind of control it because it was really hard when I couldn't control that. And even later, when I found my way into shamanism, I discovered that my being able to see those stories was actually for the good of being able to show up for someone and validate for them when others in their life had caused them to question their realities. So then I could see that reality, which again, I'm always laughing, like, what even is reality? But a projection. So I could validate for them their projection of reality so they didn't feel so alone in their experience. And then, yeah, then I, somewhere along the line started seeing dead people again too. So that was a part of it. So to answer when you said, how am I helping people now? The timing of this call is actually incredible always. These you can never I can never make these things up, and I always just sit by and observe as time passes. So I just had a very close to home traumatic situation, tragedy literally across the street with my neighbors. And they had been through some things about a year ago, some with, marriage troubles, infidelity, and in the midst of it, I was working with them as clients too. So they're friends, and I can work with friends and be able to kind of separate out. So I was supporting them. They knew what I do. And we had done some work with their beliefs, their hearts, trying to help heal their hearts from infidelity. And I had them clear their house. And they said to me after we cleared their house that they noticed a rose bush bloomed that had never bloomed in like 5 years. So they knew there was something happening. So the rose bush bloomed and they're still struggling, trying to figure out how to come back together after infidelity. And they take a pregnancy test and they find out that she's pregnant. And I'm probably going to cry telling this story. And so they find out she's pregnant. They give birth to a baby girl, their fourth girl, in April of this year. And fast forward on Thursday, I'm in my kitchen and I'm feeling very inspired to cook a lot of food. And I had so many things to do. We have four kids in our house. I have one that's out of the house now, four in the house. And I have multiple businesses and I had so much to do. But for some reason, I felt so compelled to just relax and cook all day. So I made a ton of food, soups, baked CDs, all these things. And I'm like, we're just gonna have a nice night, relaxed. I had the music going. And I was like, I don't know why I'm cooking so much because our kids are leaving in 2 days, but I feel it, so I'm doing it. And I have a class on Saturday, so maybe it's for that. I don't know. And my husband's in the kitchen relaxing, and he says to me, Athena, there looks to be sirens outside. He's like, I think I should go check. So I looked out front and I said, yeah, there's two police vehicles in front of our neighbor's house. And he said to me, I'm gonna go over there and see what's going on and see if they need help. And he's my husband's like Superman. He's like, who needs help? Let me get my cape. I'm going. And I said, David, maybe just wait because what if it's very private, whatever's going on? But I was cooking and I was in the zone. I was on the phone. And he said, no, what if they need help with their kids? And I was like, if you feel it in your bones, go over and check. So he goes, and probably about 10 minutes later, he comes back with two of their small children and he's crying, the children are crying, and I'm like, what's going on? And the 5-year-old says to me, my sister's dead. And I was like, what? So she jumps in my arms. I'm holding her, calming her, having a talk with her. My husband's crying. He's holding their 3-year-old. We all come in the living room and we're just trying to just like breathe and calm. My cat comes over and the 5-year-old looks and says, when did you get a cat? She just like stopped hysterically crying and said, when did you get a cat? And I said, well, it's Kai's cat, but it's mine now. And she, she said, can I pet the cat? And I was like, yes, of course. And this cat came and sat and let her pet her, which how many cats do this? And before I knew it, we had a house full of people. So we had their 13-year-old and her friend came over. And I had to kind of get in touch with her mom so she can pick her up. And then the nanny, they have an au pair. So she came over. She's crying. And then the grandmother came over. And then the mother of the 13-year-old came over. And we had a full house of people at dinner time. And so I thought, well, I can offer food. We're offering our home comfort. And then I had a ton of food. So I just started to offer food to everyone. And they were praying and they were hoping that this baby could live, could live through it. And I heard the nanny on the phone with the another nanny, and they were saying, like, Jesus is gonna save this baby and God's gonna keep her alive. And excuse me. And I knew that wasn't gonna happen. I knew that wasn't going to happen. And so for me as they say healer for a shaman, and I never really fully resonate with the term, but this is a term that they use. And so sitting by, I knew like this child has already left her body. She's gone. She could still choose to come back, but I don't feel like she's going to. So I already felt very strongly that her contract was up and that she had only come for a short time, unfortunately only 4 months. So I, kind of had to keep that truth to myself and hold space and provide comfort. And they stayed for several hours. They left. They flew the baby's body up to, they were able to get a pulse because she had no pulse. She didn't wake up from her nap. And so they were able to get a pulse and get her body to where the heart was alive, but really it was just the body was alive. Helicoptered her up north because we don't have as much amenities at the beach. And then we kept in touch with the parents. The next day, I talked to the parents. It was very emotional. And the father asked me if I was able to connect at all with her soul. And I was. And I shared messages from her and described to him how I was seeing her. For some reason, I was seeing her as a 16-year-old girl, like as a teenager. And so I described what she was saying. And the big question they had was because they had to make a decision in 2 hours if they would donate her organs. Awful. And so I sat with them on the phone and we cried together. And the wife asked me, will she be upset if we donate her organs? And so I asked her spirit, what do you have to say about this? And she said, I'm not connected to that body anymore. So you can let them know that my body belongs to them and they can do whatever feels comfortable for them. So, what I was able to do in this time, we couldn't evade death because that from what she shared with me, that wasn't in her plan to stay for very long. But to provide that comfort, and I shared with them a story of friends of ours whose daughter was on the brink of death, and unfortunately, another child died, and those organs saved her life. So, it was a very hard moment to be present with. The grief was already happening live time, the pain was very present, and I couldn't take the pain away, but I was able to provide just a hug, a comfort, some validation and reassurance in the moment. Yeah. So sometimes I'm working with families in the moment of the trauma, as it's happening, which is very, very intensive. Sometimes it's right before the death. So I have supported families right to assist a loved one with crossing over and giving them a really beautiful ending. And I also am able to support on the other side following the grief, following the loss. Yeah, so it looks a lot different. Yeah.
Oh, thank you for sharing that. And we'll keep that family in our prayers. And yeah, you
Yeah.
can't take away the pain, but you can just give some comfort and reassurance and just to be there. That's really a gift of a good friend. Can we go back to your story with your mom's passing and you yourself had a miraculous healing? Am I correct in that?
Correct. Yeah.
Okay, share a little bit about that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Interesting. Also, interestingly, I was just having this conversation with a friend yesterday about when I was sick. So my friend is going through, another friend is going through the exact same thing that I went through, where she's got the gastrointestinal illness. She's, unsure what's going on. So the doctors have her doing a lot of testing, and she's doing very similar testing to what I did. And it just goes on and on. So I was doing the upper endoscopy. They had me do the gastric emptying studies and in and out of the ER. And they would say, "Oh, it's your gallbladder," and then they say, "Oh, maybe it's this," and they just couldn't pinpoint what it was, but they knew something was wrong from the way the body would respond to the scope or symptoms alone. I mean, we know our symptoms. I was vomiting almost every day for about 7 months, so it's in severe pain. So this all started probably, I'd say, about a year after my mom passed away, maybe a little over a year after. And the sequencing of events was really interesting. So she passed, as you said, on Christmas Day. I was pregnant with my daughter. So I was about 5 months away from giving birth to my daughter, not even 4.5 months. And in the next 4 months, I lost two other family members. So it was three close family members kind of back to back to back. And then the birth of my first daughter, because I had two boys at this point. And, I was so overjoyed to give birth to a girl that I was just all in and never really had the chance to process the grief and the shock of losing three significant family members in such a short time. And then suddenly there was this quiet that came about. I would be cooking, and that was the time that I would talk to my mom on the phone. And so there would just be this eerie silence. And I would just have a breakdown and cry in the middle of the night. I'd be up. I've always had insomnia. So I'd be up until 2, 3, 4 in the morning with this baby, with this strange mix of, love and joy and peace, but also intense grief and loneliness. And as this was happening, my husband and I were growing further and further apart. So we decided to start counseling. And our first day of counseling, we left. I was feeling kind of hopeful, and we went out to eat. And we went home, and that night I was sick. So I thought initially maybe food poisoning or, parasite, who knows? But it never ended. So the vomiting started and it kept going, and the stomach pain. And I really feel that first session with the therapist really kicked up some emotions in my body that my body wasn't able to process. And so the best way that my body could process was to physically vomit right out, so everything. So this went on for a time, and I'd say probably 7 months in, I was just ready to be done. I was like, at this point, like I'd lost a ton of weight, could barely breastfeed my baby. I was very lonely, very depressed, and I was ready to just end it after that last test where I knew nothing was going to come up. And so I called a shaman that I'd heard about on my way home from, I was coming back from, I think it was Wilmington, which is probably 2 hours away. I was driving home, I was crying, and I remembered, it just popped in my mind that my neighbor, another neighbor at the time, had told me about this shaman. So I said, you know what, I'm just going to call her. I don't know what else to do. I have a babysitter right now. Maybe she can get me in today. So I called. She's like, yeah, I can get you in. And the time lined up perfectly to where I would be literally driving by her office in town. So I went in, and I'd never been to a shaman before. I was very open. I was into yoga, but I'd never been to a shaman. So I didn't know what to expect. She had a table, she had me lay on the table, and she just started doing energy work and shaking my legs and, doing all kinds of things that were kind of strange, but I was open to it. And she had me roll back over onto my back, and she looked at me and she said, "What are you sad about?" And I was like, "My mom." And she's like, "Well, she's right here." And I was like, "What do you mean?" And she's like, "She's literally right here." And she started to channel messages to me from mommy. And I knew she was telling the truth. She was telling me things there's no way she could have known. I'd never met her before. And then she also said, well, there's a boy with her, because she'd lost a son who was 11 years old. And again, so much grief and trauma. And she's like, he's with her. And she said, well, your mom had all these gifts. You have all these gifts. Like, you could use these gifts. And I was like, what do you mean? And she's like, well, your mom was clairvoyant and you're clairsentient. And like, maybe you should do a shaman training. And I just started crying because I had just learned what the word clairsentient meant. So I'd never heard this word, never knew what it was, but I kept thinking something was wrong with me. I was thinking I was crazy, or remember I told you I kept having these like flashes of things, and then it would be coupled with all these feelings, and then I'd be like, am I making this up, this story about this person because they remind me of a movie. I couldn't make sense of it, and I thought maybe I was crazy. And so somehow Google had guided me to the definition of clairsentient 2 days before I met the shaman. So she says this to me, and I'm like, I literally just learned what that word means. And she's like, yeah. So she said something about me having a gift with the cards, which at the time, for years, I had tarot cards that I would just play with friends and family. And then they would come back a year later and they'd say, oh my God, everything you said it happened, it came true. And so she's like, you have a gift with the cards, like you could really help people with these things. And I'm like, that's crazy. I've like, I could never have thought of this, right? And she said, maybe think about doing the shaman training, but you have to grieve. And if you don't grieve, it's going to become cancer. And I had just lost my 3 family members to cancer. So I went home and I called my sister and I was like, oh my God, I saw this lady and she saw mommy and she saw Stevie and she told me this. And I was just like blown away. And she's like, well, did she help you with like, did she tell you what's wrong with you? And I was like, she said I have to grieve. And I remember she was like, did she tell you how to grieve? And I was like, no. And my sister is actually a counselor. So she didn't tell me. She didn't say like, "Oh, here's how to grieve." So I was like, I think I need to sit with that. So I sat in prayer that night and I just asked God, "Hey, how do I grieve?" And I heard, "Write a letter to mommy." So I was like, "All right, I'll do that." So I wrote a letter that night, the same day that I saw the shaman. I wrote a letter that night. I woke up the next day completely healed. Completely healed. No pain, no vomiting. And I tell people, because I work sometimes with people with chronic pain and chronic illness, that I know the fear when you feel better. Like that day that you feel better when you think it's just for the day and that the pain is going to come back or the sickness is going to come back tomorrow. So I sat with that for a while. You know, I was afraid to eat because everything I ate would make me vomit. I could eat grapes, rice, and insure. That's what I was living off of at the time. So I thought, I still won't eat because I don't want to get sick again, but I feel okay. So then that Saturday came. I went to her on a Thursday. So Friday, I remember I was okay. And then Saturday, I was like, I wonder if I can eat a little bit. And so gradually I started eating again, but the pain and the sickness never came back. It was completely gone.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
Incredible. And did
Yeah.
that lead you then to becoming a shaman? Many people, and I don't even know if I'm clear, know exactly what a shaman is and what's involved. So if you wouldn't mind talking about that and just
Yeah.
sending you so much love for just everything you've been through with the
Yeah.
loss. I tell you, grief is a monster. And as much as we
It,
know our loved ones live on,
it
there's only
really
one
is.
way to the other side of grief, and that's straight through it. Oh,
Yes, exactly. So, yeah, so I didn't initially go right to the training. We were probably about, I think like 4 or 5 months from the training, and I was still very skeptical. So I loved hearing you say in your description that at one point you were a skeptic. I was still skeptical of the whole psychic shaman phenomena. So I thought, well, maybe she tells everyone that so that they can sign up for her shaman training. So I was like, I don't know about that. So I was traveling to Ohio to visit my family, and a friend of mine had really wanted me to meet her cousin. And we'd been friends for a long time, since college at that point. So, she'd talked about her cousin before, and she's like, oh, I feel like my cousin and you would just hit it off. She's into some of the same things. She told me this. So her cousin calls me and she's like, hey, why don't you just stop by my office? I heard you're in town. I was like, okay, cool. So I go to her office and she's like, do you want a session? And I was like, sure. And turns out she's a shaman. So she gets me in the room and she's like, "Oh wow." And she's like, "So you're so how far down your path? Like how much of your training have you done, talking about shamanism and all these things?" And I was like, I have no idea what you're talking about. I was like, I've done no training. I'm not on any path to being a shaman. And so she said, are you serious? And she's like, well, you have these female ancestors behind you, and they're really encouraging you to walk this path. Like, you're ready. And I was just in shock at this session. So I leave Ohio, I come back, and maybe like a week or a couple weeks later, I'm in my therapy. I'm still seeing the same therapist for a year at this point. And I am in her office alone because my husband and I we were separating. And so at this point, we were doing one-on-one. So I look over and there's a book on shamanism on the table next to me in her office. So I look at her and I'm like, Tony, has that book always been there? And she's like, no, why? She's like, I switch it out sometimes. Why? I'm like, okay, this is really weird because, and I go on and I tell her all the stories and how this lady was trying to tell me to do her shaman training. And she's like, I think you should do it. So she kind of pushed me to do the shaman training. So I did. I signed up, I did it. And my thinking was, well, I'll do this training. I don't really know what it is either. So I'll do this training and maybe it'll help me to be a better yoga teacher, because I'm teaching yoga at this point. So, and I know I don't want to do architecture and I don't really know what I want to do with my life. So I'll just probably be home with my kids and teach yoga and it'll make me better at meditation. I don't know. So I sign up for it and we start to practice journeying between the worlds. So for those who don't know, a shaman is someone who's working with the spirit world on behalf of others. And the thing with the spirit world is that there are many worlds. So it's not just one spirit world. So when I teach this now, so I've been teaching it for many years now, but when I explain the spirit world in shamanism, we have an upper, a middle, and a lower world that we journey to. So our soul can leave the body and can travel and journey through different parallels. So within each world are different dimensional beings that we as shamans can interact with, can petition for help for ourselves, but also for others and also for the planet. So when we're deciding to step into this path, we're deciding to be an intermediary, a person who's like, and I think of it kind of like, I describe it to people when service workers. So the other day we had police officers, we had paramedics, there's all different types of support and service workers that show up in a tragedy. So we're on the team with the other helpers who are showing up to help people through whatever they need help with. And it doesn't have to be tragedy. You can have help if you just need a boost in life, depression, anything. There's help available for. So sometimes people will call just 911 and they don't know. So they don't know the number for poison control. We've all memorized the number for 911. So we'll call and then 911 will dispatch you to the proper service workers. Maybe you have a fire and you don't know what's the number to the fire department, but you do know 911. So oftentimes people know of God, they know of God. And so I think of God as kind of the 911. And then people are dispatched out, spirit helpers, angels, guides, people like myself. And so when I was initiated in, somewhere along the way, I've done a lot of trainings. I started to encounter archangels and saints, and I did not grow up in a Catholic faith. I grew up First Baptist, then Christian. So Catholic faith was very unfamiliar to me. Saints, archangels, extremely unfamiliar. But when I started journeying, I was journeying to the upper world and I was meeting these figures. And I remember there was a woman in my training that was Catholic. And I came out of a journey and I was like, oh my God, there were these 7 people, figures, and they were male and female. Some of them looked like they were floating. I was like, I swear they were floating. And I'm describing it to her. And she's like, do you think they were the 7 major archangels? And I was like, no. And then I went later and I looked it up and I was like, oh my God, it was the 7 major archangels. So I started to meet them, and then St. Peter started to show up and walked me through heaven and showed me kind of like traditionally he was recognized as being at the gates. And then I started talking to God more, and I was shown how prayers work and how meditation works, and how people's prayers are kind of, they showed me almost like the matrix, the words going up and then the answers and dispatching coming down. And they showed me my role was to receive kind of the dispatch when people prayed. So fascinating thing all these years later is sometimes people will find their way to me, or I'll meet them in the supermarket, or my kids' friends. It could be anywhere. It's not just through my work. And I'll hear their prayers, and I'll say, were you praying for, X, Y, and Z? And then they'll say, yes. Oh my God, because their prayers are heard, but it takes sometimes someone on earth who's willing to listen to that dispatch and then respond. And that's why a lot of times people think prayers go unanswered, but really it takes sometimes humans to deliver the answer to the prayer. So there's a lot of explanations for unanswered prayers and things like this. But yeah, so that was kind of my path. And I never planned to be a shaman, but as soon as I finished the training, as the universe, God would have it, the yoga studio owner said to me, hey, I have this room in the back and I know you're finishing this program. Do you want to try doing that out of the room? And you don't have to pay me anything. And I was like, well, I guess, if it's free and I'm just trying, I'm just practicing, I guess. And I just thought like, oh, I'll just do this and then it won't work out. And then I'll just teach yoga. And people started coming, and then I ended up in and I ended up beginning to make money to where I was like, well, now she was asking for 40%, and then at first that was fine, but when I started to make a lot of money, the 40% was a lot. So I moved into larger spaces, and I was welcomed into an integrative health practice with naturopaths and psychotherapists, and so I was working with a whole team. And then that office was bought out, so we had to separate. And at which point I opened my own wellness studio with 2 other women. And then COVID happened, but my client base just kept growing exponentially over the years, to the point when I had my wellness studio, I had a really great community. We were constantly having events. I was hosting retreats. I was doing one-on-one. I was full-time as a shaman, then I started teaching shamanism because people kept asking me, "Can you teach me? I only want to learn with you," because it's some of the things we learn are scary because there are scary things in the spirit world. So people they didn't want to learn under others, and so I had a whole kind of strong forced push into teaching it, as also happens. And COVID happened, and I was forced again. I kept being kind of pushed every bit of the way, pushed to go virtual, which I was very much against the Zoom. And I was like, I'm not, but I was pushed into it. A couple of groups asked me to come and speak on their group Zooms. So I was working with the schools at the time. So they had me come in for the high school kids. I was working with Camp Rehoboth, which is a LGBTQ organization here. So they were setting up the Zooms, and my job was to just hit start Zoom. And so I was like, that's fine, I can do that. And then soon enough, I had to figure out how to set up my own Zooms. A friend really pushed me to do it, and I did. And I started to get clients from all over the world. And so then it kept growing, and I was, fascinated, shocked that I was able to channel messages from people's deceased loved ones when they were in the UK or they were in Japan. And I'm like, it still works. This is I know that it should, but to actually be in session with someone I didn't know that was across the world and to still be able to so clearly see, hear, and feel their loved ones was just mind blowing. So I got really hip to the Zoom for several years. And of course, when the world opened back up, a couple years ago, people wanted in person again. So now I do a little bit of both, in person, Zoom, still doing my women's retreats and my trainings, both in person and online.
You are one incredible person. Yeah, I didn't expect to be doing what I'm doing here either. So it's interesting how the universe, God, whatever, just propels you to where you need to be, those chain of events. I wanted to ask you, Athena, there's people here that may never visit with a shaman. They may never come to your website, but their hearts are heavy right now. They're grieving. They want to know their loved ones are around. Is there any tool that you could give people that
Yeah.
could just help us open up ourselves? And then I'd like to talk about what you offer, what's on your website, etc.
Yeah, yeah. So I actually wrote a book. So my book is called Leave with Love. And it started with the tools that I was using to heal myself through my own grief, the letter writing, to some of the deeper exercises through what we call the dark night of the soul, that period of time where you feel very alone and you have to just sit with it. You can't fight it, it's a part of the process. So I share the tools, in the book of the things that help to get us through the dark night of the soul, the things that help us to understand the purpose of our relationships. So I kind of go into the different types of relationships. There's karmic relationships, we have soul contracts, we have soul mates, we also have twin flames. So these can all be very sweet, some can be traumatic. So once you start to understand the purpose that they hold, it helps us to find a lot of peace with those relationships and to let them pass. And a lot of times with suffering, I liken it to childbirth. I've given birth 3 times. So I liken it to, that like you're feeling the labor pains and they're doing something good. They're moving this baby through your body down and out, and it has to happen. So we can't stop the labor pains. When we witness someone else's suffering, what I was shown when my mom, because my mom really suffered in the end, and I was like, there's no God, because if there's a God, this would not happen. Right. And I was angry, and I was like, it was like, I knew there was a God, I knew, but I was so mad. I was like, you don't exist. Like if you existed, you wouldn't let this happen. And so I was just like, there's no God. And I was cold. I was angry. And I said, I wrote on a piece of paper in my hotel room in Ohio that night when she passed, like, what is the point of suffering? And in the morning, I woke up and I was compelled to open my phone at the time, and I was guided to an article. And what I heard, because I also am clairaudient, so I hear, but what I heard was suffering moves us. And I was like so angry that I was like, whatever, that's stupid. You know, I was like, I don't, that is so stupid. Why would you design this? Why would you make a plan where this is the way you move people? And so I was shown how when mommy was sick, that there were all these ripples, you know, that came off of her suffering, where people were moved to show up with love and service and generosity, and there was healing in some of these relationships surrounding her. So I was shown that, but I was guided to a Buddhist article, and in the Buddhist article, they said everything that I was hearing, you know, the voice say to me, which was about the purpose of suffering being to move us. And so all these years later, you know, I did include that in the book, some of what I heard about suffering and our experiences and our time here being temporary. I was led the Buddhist path at that point. So I started to kind of study more in depth different types of Buddhism. And so even as a shaman, there's a lot of different types of shamans. So shamans vary across cultures. We're not tied to any specific religion, but there are shamans that do choose religions or choose specific cultural niches. So there's, you know, African shamans, Celtic shamans, Haitian shamans. So I actually, even though I'm from Louisiana, my roots are, my dad's Creole, so I have kind of like the whole Southern. I was always forbidden from hoodoo and voodoo and all of this, but I ended up really moving down the path of Tibetan shamanism. So that's very much where, when I'm kind of falling into a very solid set of beliefs about impermanence and suffering and grief and love and oneness, is coming from kind of the Tibetan roots. But all religions, they cross over. We all overlap in our beliefs when they're centered on love. So yeah, with that said, you know, just, and I don't remember exactly what the last question was, but that's kind of how, you know, I've kind of moved through the understanding of the grief and suffering. The tools, you asked about the tools. So yeah, I have a ton of them in the book, but what I tell people is look for signs. Number one, that's something that can just bring you like a little bit of a breath, a little bit of a moment of relief, is when you see a sign of your loved one. So my current husband, so I did end up divorcing my husband at the time. He also thought I was crazy. So as I started to go down this route, he was like, okay, this lady's crazy. So we had to go our separate ways. And that was also traumatic. And so the book also includes a lot of the tools that I had to use to navigate the ending of a marriage to my former best friend. Right. So also grief is involved in that process. It feels like a death. It feels like, you know, he died, I died, in that transition parts of us. So that's all in the book as well. But my current husband, when we met through our children, but he actually came to me as a client. And as we were getting to know each other and working on his healing, he had lost his mom, and he'd also experienced the ending of a marriage that was very grief stricken. But I said to him, let's come up with some signs for your mom. And so we just made them up. And I do this with clients when they've lost someone. Sometimes I make it up, sometimes I guide them through their own shamanic journey, and they get to come up with the signs or be guided to the signs. So we came up for him the yellow bird and a purple flower. We said these are going to be the signs for your mom. And so all these years later, that was probably 5 or 6 years ago. So we still will see, you know, a yellow bird in a very specific way. One day he's in the bathroom and he said there was a yellow bird tapping on the window. And, you know, so really funny little things. Or he looked on the back patio and he was talking to his sister, and he looks down and there's a purple flower coming through the concrete. Right. So very unlikely moments where that sign will show up as a little wink that I'm here. I'm here. I see you. I hear you. Talk to me. His mom was literally tapping on the window at the time saying, I need you to talk to me and listen to me. Right. So our loved ones still show up and they want to help us and they want to share messages with us and guide us and protect us. But they do need us to listen and tune in and pay attention.
Beautiful words. Beautiful. All right, let's visit present day and seasideshaman.com. What can we find on your website, Athena?
Yeah. So interestingly, I don't mention mediumship at all on my website. So that is something that was always very personal and private to me, was my work with the other side. A large part of why I kept that very private was because I was still wounded from my previous relationship, where, I was really made to feel like it was crazy, and I was afraid that he might take my kids or things like this. So I didn't want to advertise that I had talked to the dead. So since then, I've done a lot of healing and opening up, and I've really thought about it. And when people are meant to come to me for that, for example, if someone were to hear this and feel like, oh my gosh, I need to connect with a loved one, they would find me. And that's what happens. People find me when they need that specific type of work. On my website, what you'll find is a lot around support through your breakthrough. So I really advertise to women that if you're stuck, if you feel like you're not moving forward and you need help, that you don't have to do it alone. And so a lot of what I offer is centered around the concept of breakthrough. So I offer breakthrough sessions one on one. I offer breakthrough emails. So people will sometimes not have the time for a full session or the budget. And so they'll go online, and that's my way of being able to support at a budget. And I really work to meet women wherever they are financially. So I do also offer sliding scale, because I never want finances to be a reason that I don't work with someone in this time, where in this world right now of coaching and, spiritual, support, I'm seeing a lot of practitioners who are charging a lot of money for sessions, and their trainings are thousands of dollars, and I'm hearing so much about it, and I just have not felt guided to move down that path just yet. I'll say just yet. And so my prices, I have some, that are more costly because we're spending more time and we're doing very deep work, but I also have affordable options. And I try to, like I said, I try to meet women exactly where they are, to know that you're not alone, and we can definitely move you forward wherever you're feeling stuck, whether it's a physical illness, grief, whether you're just not recovering from old ways of thinking, anxiety, you just feel stuck. We move through it and we get you moving forward.
Thank you for that. It's so
Yeah.
important to really embrace it because as much as my podcasts bring people in looking for evidence of the afterlife, my whole why really is to help people move through grief and then live a great life.
Yes.
I think as souls, we come here to experience, we forgot who we really are. It's a
Yeah.
real tough place. This place called Earth, very, very tough. But to know that dreams are possible, to know we get stuck, to know there are tools to move through, there's ways to tap into what our desires are and move towards those. And, someday we're all going to close our eyes one last time here on Earth. We're going to open them, and there's going to be our loved ones and our pets and, parades and whatnot. But we want to be able to look back and go, yeah, I got my money's worth out of life. Yeah, I did it. I did it. So thank you for being somebody who really stands for people having
Yeah.
their all.
Yes, I love that. And also, I teach this, I provide the trainings, and I love that you do a lot of near death experience content, because I'll say that when we're coming into our gifts, it can be really encouraging and validating just to hear someone's near death experience. So there have been times in my life where I thought I was crazy, and like, is anybody else hearing what I'm hearing? And then I would go onto YouTube and I would watch near death experience videos, and people would be describing the things that I was seeing in my dreams or my meditations or things I was hearing. And it would make me feel a little less crazy, right? So I share, I really appreciate that you're also sharing so much near death experience content, because it's not just helping grieving people to move forward, but it's also helping to validate those gifts and those senses that we have had for centuries, that our ancestors understood, that for some reason were kind of quieted and shamed and put in a box. We know why, because people who are aware cannot be controlled. People who aren't working with the spirit world, they're without defense, right? They're more vulnerable. So we know why those things were tucked away, but we're in an era where everybody's starting to wake back up to their gifts. And just by hosting the near death experience as you are, you're doing your part to also validate and help open up people to their own gifts. So thank you.
Thank you for the thank you. You're most welcome. Yeah, if I can uncover a reason to believe in the afterlife and
Yeah.
tell great stories, there's so much. And there's so much with science and medicine also. You got a little kitty on your lap there. Athena, I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for being our guest today.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. And I really appreciate just the conversation and being able to share.
I love it. Love having a new friend. And for our listener or our viewer, thank you for taking the time to be here. Remember to visit Athena's website, which is seasideshaman.com. You can find out more about her, and there's so much great stuff actually there to explore. And as a reminder, come visit me at wedon'tdie.com. Every Sunday, 2 p.m. Eastern Time, we offer a free 90-minute Sunday gathering. It is a non-denominational, empowering, fun service. We'll call it that, with healing and more, lots of music. And the last half is a medium demonstration. So people get reconnected with their loved ones all over the world, and you get to see just how close our loved ones are. So that is free and it is fabulous. Yeah, lots of good things coming up. And like I said, you can have a free copy of my book if you enter your name and email address at the bottom of the page there at wedon'tdie.com. One reason I recommend it is chapter 10 is about grief, how to survive it, why we grieve, what's happening biologically. And once we can understand it, it does help move through. And there are some tools really to help ease the pain. And of course, we've got a huge community to join with as well. So in closing, I'm Sandra Champlain, and it is always my pleasure to be your host on We Don't Die. I do believe that life is an education for the soul and that your life here on earth is important. And I love it when you say your little prayer. It's a 911 dispatch. You never know exactly who it's going to be, but you have a whole team of loved ones, guides, etc., right there for you. You're never alone. So I really want to thank you for listening or for watching, and we'll see you again soon.